Oh.
It's like first day back, right?
Oh, what is going on? Okay, here we go.
He said you could rotate it so it would go.
Put it over here, it might be able to get all three of y'all.
Yeah,
He said if you go like this, it'll go landscape.
Okay. You got it.
I have a really good iPhone, so I do.
No, what? iPhone? You're so
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. I might. We'll talk about it later. But anyway, I love iPhones, by the way.
Hey, you can see my tattoo.
Well, I can hold it for y'all. That's as easy as you can get. Just let me know when y'all ready.
And right, go.
All right.
Get that. And this is 96.1 FM, Whole People's Revolutionary Radio. I'm JV.
And I'm your girl, Tina Marie.
And go ahead.
Sol Gata.
Soul Gata's in the house. So we got
Yay!
a good show. We got Sister Soul and another kind of soul. And, you know, she's here. She's going to talk to us about a little bit about everything, cultura, dancing. You're a dancer. Wow.
She's a danzante.
Danzante. That's what's up. We love danzantes here. We're all danzantes too.
Oh, that's
We all
right.
do danza.
And salsa.
We all do
También,
danza.
I forgot. Sorry.
And we all do salsa, but not as, you know, she's been doing it for a very long time. But, you know, we're going to talk about that and about the concentration camp, right? You did, you know, some work in there, and that was, you know, wow, it's, you know, very interesting, the stories you have, and, you know, we're going to learn about that. But first, let's start it off by, you know, why don't you tell us, so some of the listeners know you, some don't. So for those who don't, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up? Don't start banging on me, girl. Don't do that. But you know, a little bit about how you know, where you grew up, and you know, what got you into danza, what got you into
Salsa.
cultura and salsa. Absolutely.
So I grew up in the Bay Area, partly in Oakland in the Twomps, Murder Doves, and San Jose, the Barrio Horseshoe area. I spent a lot of time in Santa Cruz, and my early teaching experiences were always about advocacy and activism because of the environments that I grew up in. Joey and I grew up with the same people. I think we even went to some of the same schools. I've known these two for a minute. And so that has always informed my instruction and informed how I work. Some of my role models have been Bell Hooks, Jeffrey Duncan Andrade, R.I.P. Bell Hooks, Bettina Love, Brie Pacauer. I can go on and on. But basically, these role models of mine have always been about abolitionist teaching in the hood. Jeffrey Duncan Andrade started Roses from Concrete actually here in Oakland. So they've informed my instruction, and from the get-go when I started my career in education, and there's been different facets. I've worked with folks with disabilities, I've done childcare, I've done community advocacy. And so what I wanted to talk about today was my time having worked in the jail system and my experiences in that specific jail system. So what piqued my curiosity was that my brothers, having grown up in the hood, my brothers have both been part of the effects of what the Blue Line can do to fractured communities. So they've both had to serve time, and they're just products of their environment and had struggles with addiction, which landed them in these concentration camps, or AKA slave chambers. And one of my brothers came back 100 times worse off after he had witnessed somebody commit suicide. So that initially piqued my interest. And so when I had the opportunity to go work in one of these concentration camps, I did. And so that's what I wanted to talk about with you today.
Beautiful. And I just want to say, I'm the luckiest guy in the world right here. I got these lovely revolutionary women right here and the brother right here. We're having a ball. We love it here. And we love, getting together and talking about this stuff. But this is serious stuff. Now, don't make we might clown and have a good time and laugh and this and that. But we talk about serious situations. This is the concentration camps. Now, it's not just a warehouse. We're talking about a place that manufactures trauma. This is the concentration camps, whether we're talking about jails or prisons, these are trauma factories. I mean, let's call it what they are. And, they're created that way. This is why they're created. They're not created to help us, under colonization. They're created to destroy us, and they're targeting certain populations and certain age groups. If we look at the age groups of, let's say, the Chicano Nation who is being criminalized, we're talking 15 to 35 is the focus, the age focus. 15 to 35 is also, and it's not a coincidence, it's also military age. So these are the soldiers in any war. This is going to be 15 to 35. This is military age. And this is the group, the population that is being targeted by the oppressor. So, but it's very interesting to have this Sister Soul in here. And you don't mind if I call you Sister Soul, do you? Okay, good. And we love the sun, by the way. So Soul is Spanish for sun, for those who don't know Espanol, but let me say this, Sister Soul, when you were there, you're probably the first or second person I've talked to who had a different perspective. You were in the concentration camp too. You happened to be working there. So that's a different perspective, but you still saw, almost everything that I would see, that the prisoners would see, right? You're there too. You're seeing everything that's occurring in there, as well as their treatment or lack thereof. So let me ask you, when it comes to the concentration camp, these prisoners, let's take medical, for example. Did you see them getting medical care? Did you see medical care being used as a weapon? How was medical care issued or not issued to the prison population?
Yeah, so what I want to first start out is that when I was there, and this was about 3 years ago when I left, but while I was there, they were under consent decree. There was a group of folks with disabilities who had filed a class action lawsuit, and it was actually the second one in a row, which had followed the death of Michael Tyree, who was a man with mental illness with bipolar disorder who was murdered by 3 of the COs in this jail. And so after that happened, they had consent decree due to some nonprofit organizations. They're in everybody's ear because of the vile, rife human rights abuses. And so the second consent decree was due to the advocacy of folks who had been in there that weren't being treated, like people in wheelchairs. And so what I want to share is a very short clip from a very young man. He was 19 years young, and he gave me consent to use this. I'm not going to say when he gave it to me, but his mother was an English learner, and she didn't speak English, and so she didn't have the access that maybe somebody who was not in a vulnerable position to seek out ADA, to seek out that they were being compliant. So this young man who was 19 years old, he was in a wheelchair. He had been shot, and prior to being incarcerated, he had been receiving physical therapy 3 times a week. Why? It's a very critical moment in time after you're in a wheelchair to be able to walk, right? He received nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. And the funny part is that when I was hired, it was to work with the women as an independent studies teacher, even small SGI, which is small group instruction. But because I worked so well with the women and everybody's like, oh, y'all, you seem to get along. So they stuck me in this maximum security unit where I met this man, and I was stuck with 60 guys. It was a little overwhelming, but
Wow.
my heart went out to all of them, right? Like I wanted to hear all their stories because I had so many students. I employed centers.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but were they respectful? You know, when we
Yeah.
think of on television, we see prisoners on television, and then we see women prisoners, and it's always something negative and bad. Let me ask you: 60 guy prisoners, you're the only woman, and you're a beautiful woman. I mean, come on now.
Thank you.
You're in there with these guys who some of them will never see a woman again in their life. Were they respectful?
Absolutely.
Oh,
You
perfect.
know, I had to like put up boundaries, but coming from where I do, that
Yeah.
has never been an issue, right? I mean, I had to learn that the hard way.
Girl,
But
you have to do that out here too.
yeah. I mean, that's anywhere. That's at the salsa club every week I go,
Oh,
right?
damn it.
Hey!
What?
We get
Yeah.
We need we need an example of
We're
that
getting on the
salsa
thing
dance.
tonight.
We're gonna get some salsa. She's gonna instruct us
Yes.
tonight.
Salsa classes any day, all day,
That's what's
bachata lessons, what have you. I've been in that world for about 18 years, by the way.
Wow.
Beautiful.
So I'm always
Oh
good for
my
it. I'm good
goodness.
for salsa lessons.
Okay.
So I just want to read you a small clip of a tidbit of what he wrote to me. Last time I filed a grievance was a few months ago, but I had filed hell of them. When I got moved to this pod, the police that rolled me threw hell of my papers away, and my folder with it, my grievance, and appeals was in there. I appealed the grievance, but when they replied that Dr. Beep said I was belligerent, but I didn't ever raise my voice to get my point across, so that was a bunch of baloney. Shared mother's phone number. The beep ain't want to see me shining. I appreciate what you're doing for me. You're one of the realest on my team, and you barely even know me. Never got medical treatment. People
Wow.
in the jail in this unit were trying to do stretches with him. I remember bringing in like pamphlets from physical therapists that I knew of, like, maybe this will help, but I didn't have the medical knowledge to help this poor man. And that is the kind of shit you see all the time. So that's just with, you know, how they deal with medical treatment. And again, at the time they were under consent decree for that very same thing. So it's kind of funny. They know that they're under the radar for that, but yet, you know, they just kept doing that. Yeah.
That's incredible. And it's an incredible story. Another question I had, and I was always curious about this, is when it comes to, because you're seeing it from an outside perspective, but at the same time, you are, you're inside. And so it's a whole different dynamic than coming from a prisoner's observations. But what I was always curious of is, what was the differences, the biggest differences you've seen in treatment, and the biggest similarities in treatment when it comes to male prisoners and female prisoners versus the guards?
Oh, well, obviously the guards have access to any kind of medical treatment they want. And what really struck me was like the way the women that I worked with were in the mental health unit. And so they would be sedated constantly. But the most scary reality is that the treatment that they get is going to level 5 solitary, where it's 23-hour lockdown. So if they get too out of control, quote unquote, then they send them over to the level 5. And a lot of them bounce back and forth and forth and back and back and forth. And there was a mother, because I was volunteering a little bit to learn more about this, about what was going on at Debug. And one of the mothers of one of the very women who was being back and forth, she wasn't allowed to get visits. And she was so worried about her daughter. And it's like, well, absolutely, I completely understand. And one of the classes I was teaching was bachata. And when I was doing this bachata, she started screaming and saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't move like that," and she started screaming that her dad had raped her. So we're incarcerating these women, these men with extreme levels of trauma who've suffered something like being raped by their father, and the medical treatment they're getting is sedation and level 5 lockdown, which nobody seems to even have access to. They don't ever want to let you in because they don't want you to see what's going on, and then you walk around and you hear people screaming in their cells, "Get me the F out of here, otherwise I'm going to kill myself." That's a normal thing, and they don't want that exposed. I think public accountability would look like people coming into these slave chambers, into these concentration camps unannounced, and just go pay them a visit and see what's really going on in there. So I don't know any men that were sharing like how effective their treatment were. I will say one guy who was at the top of the food chain, I think he was the concilion in the unit, he got medical treatment. I can't say everybody else that did. So there's very specific people that might be privy, and since they killed Michael Tyree, the way they're operating now is they're using the trustees and the concilion and the enforcers and the different people at the top in order, and so that's who gets the extra phone time. That's who gets the medical treatment. I mean, it's sadistic. It's sadistic. So I wish I could say more about who's getting medical treatment, but I would say that they're both the men and the women are in the same boat, unless they're getting special privileges, because that is the way that they're operating their fight clubs, right? They're not able to touch the prisoners, the incarcerated folks, so they're finding a way to do it.
How do you see people with mental illness being criminalized and funneled into the prison system?
That is rampant. That is the number one target. In fact, I don't know how much the COs at the specific jail that I was working at now make, but back then it was like at least 120K. So everybody's being well paid. I mean, we all know that the prisons, they're invested in our failure, not our success. And so there is so much money to be made off of criminalizing the most vulnerable populations. So more than anything, what we're seeing is people with mental illness, people with intellectual debility, people with bipolar, people with severe depression, people who have just been severely traumatized and beat, and especially faction of homeless folks are being filtered in, and then that's who's staying. It's easy to keep. I had one student, he had suffered from schizophrenia. He was freaking out by like the third day, and he asked to be put into the green area, where they put the child molesters.
Oh.
Yeah, he was so scared.
Oh,
because of
SNY, right?
Because of the dynamics.
Yeah.
You know, and then when I was subbing in there was a guy who was an eyewitness that got his eye stabbed, and so there's really no protection for anybody. I mean, everybody's under attack. It depends on your positionality, right? Like, some of the COs I'm sure are good people. I'm sure they come with good intentions, but we all know what's going on. Otherwise, things like Michael Tyree wouldn't have happened. Otherwise, all these men would be getting medical treatment, and ADA wouldn't be violated left, right, and left. I mean, it's unreal. I used to come home crying, and that job is the reason why I'm pursuing special ed, so that I can be a force to stop the pipeline to prison, because that is who is going in to these prison systems. And so there is specifically and especially preying on folks with mental illness.
Yeah, and you talk about the pipeline. The school to prison pipeline, I think, is something, you know, the general public literally doesn't know about, right? It's pretty crazy taking, you know, standard test scores of third graders and using that to say, oh, okay, in X amount of years, we're going to need blank amount of facilities to fill up, you know, with these kids, instead of taking these millions of dollars and investing it in children's education. Instead, they put that, you know, put a little mark on them, and, oh, that's a future inmate, because that's free slave labor. And this is something very real in the United States. I feel a lot of people do not know about this. there's a great book, The New Jim Crow. That's a really good book. It talks specifically about, how the new Jim Crow has impacted the black population or people of African descent. Also, Chicanos, though, Chicanas, Chicanx. I mean, look what's going on in ICE. So when you look at it statistically, it's just mind blowing to see how many black and brown folks are incarcerated, and black girls are actually targeted. They're the highest funneled through the school to prison pipeline, and that's not including our data on children in ICE. Though I want to, make that clear, because we know that those numbers. I mean, if you put together the numbers of indigenous children from reservations to juvenile halls to the ICE camps, those numbers do far exceed that. But here in this, as far as citizens goes, we see that both black and brown children are attacked. So in your professional opinion and your observation, what do you see from observing the aftermath of the school to prison pipeline, right? Because you're getting it on the end of when these children become adults, and now they're funneled through the system, and now they're incarcerated and enslaved. What do you see as like the end result that is making you just you're very passionate about becoming a special education teacher, and I think that's beautiful. So what do you see? Do you see if more people become like special education teachers or instructors, or if more people put time and energy into our youth, do you see that there wouldn't be as many folks incarcerated, or like what's your opinion? I just kind of want to jog your brain a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm with y'all on like abolishing the prison system altogether. I understand, defund the police, we have all these alternatives, but I think the number one thing is to divest. Like, why are COs making $120,000? How much training do they get to even do their jobs? Versus how much training do the social workers and the teachers and the like first care responders, that
COs
really
don't even need a college degree.
nope.
No,
Just like in
hell
law
no.
enforcement.
So why are they
They
making,
literally do not have a
Yeah.
degree in law, but they're enforcing the law and making six figures on our taxes.
Yeah.
Like our taxes are paying for that.
Yeah, they made hella more money than I
Someone
ever
make
will.
that make sense, please. Make
And
it
some
make
of them-
sense.
Yeah, and some of them make more than, they make over 200,000 a year for the overtime, because the overtime's time and a half, double time, they make so much money, and then they milk it because they actually create the lockdowns in the prisons. They will plant weapons and then say, this is an emergency, we gotta lock it down. They will let prisoners out to do the gladiator fights
Yeah.
to lock everything down, and they get paid double now. So they have a financial incentive to nurture, lumping on lumping crime,
It's job security.
and horizontal crime amongst the prison population. So yeah, job security, and they're just breaking it in. So that's a one aspect of jails and prisons.
I don't think she was finished answering her question though.
Well, she's not.
No.
No, I'm
Yeah.
not, but that's okay. Keep
Oh, good. Well, no, we want to hear you. You're the guest. You're the guest here, so go ahead, carry on. then.
But yeah, that's number one, right? Education, not incarceration. So when we can get the government to start investing in our education, like it costs more to send one of us to Harvard than it does to jail for a year. Like, what's up with that? So I mean, that's where it needs to happen. It needs to happen in the local government, in the state government, in the national government. All of this money needs to be funneled into our collective futures, and having programs and nonprofits specifically dedicated to making sure that students don't end up in these cookie factories, in these concentration camps, especially the most vulnerable populations. Like, why are they using the statistics, the reading scores of third graders to figure out how many prisons they're gonna make? I'm sure y'all have seen the movie 13th by Ava DuVernay, and this is a very lucrative career and business to harm and mass incarcerate our youth, which doesn't happen in any other country. So from an educator perspective, what we're trying to do is make sure there's transition. So I specifically want to become a transition specialist. It is to ensure that students who are 14 and up go directly from school to college, to a job, to special day of services, whatever it is that they need, versus the typical jail or the typical prison, which is so far often how their demographic, they target that demographic. Even more so if you're brown and you're black and you're poor. Oh, then it's like multiple intersectionalities of oppression and degradation. And then if your mom is, if your parents aren't able to speak the language and advocate for you, that's even more fuckery. And the way IDEA works in special ed is that the services end at 22. So then they're really on their own. And then they're especially vulnerable. You know what I'm saying? And that's when they easily get picked up and put into the jails. And then if they don't have a parent who's able to take care of them forever. And so I specifically think that every school district needs to have a transition specialist as part of that investment in the most vulnerable population, so that they're ensuring that they go into the right place and are not funneled to these prison systems. And more often than not, you see these in affluent districts like Palo Alto and Mountain View, because I was looking for the jobs and I'm like, what? So I mean, there really needs to be more money put into the education system to ensure the betterment and the livelihood. People need to run for school boards. People need to, again, divest away from the prison and incarceration system by all means. And I don't have all the solutions. I wish that I did. And I really thank the people that are doing this work. I highly recommend going to volunteer at Debug and work with them and find out what the latest that they're doing. They serve a lot of the jails in the Bay Area and are doing different work. When I was there last, they were trying to get the jails to get them inside so they can help teach how to file these grievances, because that was a big problem, that these men and women weren't allowed to file them, didn't know how to file them. And then for the ones that did, I had one student of mine share with me that his bunk got raided. And so if you dare file too many and then do the appeal process, you're likely to get your shit raided. He didn't have anything on him, so it was okay, but that's how they fuck with you.
Yeah, and that's the low end of F with you, right?
Sorry.
And that's
I'm
the
sorry.
yeah, it's all right.
Sorry about that.
It happens.
Don't apologize.
But that's the low end of F with you. The high end is what they did with Hugo Pennell. They murdered him. They cracked his door and had the white supremacists stab him to death for messing with the CO. So there's that, messing with your bunk, and then there's assassination. But this is what the guards do. It's real. It's real talk.
Not to mention the sexual assault and rapes, going on. It happens in the
Absolutely.
male prisons. I know a lot of it
Absolutely.
is underreported, but in the
Absolutely.
women's prisons too. And statistically, 86% of women that are incarcerated here in the United States are there because they were defending themselves or their children. So these are survivors of domestic violence, right? And what happens when you protect yourself or your children? 86. That means think about that. 86 people out of 100. That's a high stat. And people don't want to talk about that,
If you're black and brown, you go to prison.
And then the forced sterilizations that women are subjected to. There's just it just keeps going on. And I think it's absolutely disgusting that, the information you're sharing, Sol, and thank you for doing so. But that when people, because these are still people, right? Aren't they supposed to still be considered people? But yet when they're exercising their rights under state law, constitution law, what's happening? You're being re-violated again, being re-brutalized, re-traumatized. Why are you having the only thing you have? Like the only thing you have, it could be family pictures, letters, or whatever. They're taken from you. Like the little piece of humanity that you have in this 5x8 concrete box, they take it from you. For filing a grievance? But according to their own laws, you're supposed to be able to do that. They say, oh, okay, yeah. But you do that, and then it's like, none of this makes sense. Like, it's crazy, It just doesn't make sense. So this whole system's a joke, That's why I laugh at it. Because it doesn't make sense, It's just a bunch of words they just throw it on paper, make it look pretty. But
And this is why Mim said there are no rights, only power struggles, because it's true. There ain't no damn rights. They go against every right they have written, documented, and given us. And, these are colonizers' rights. But as you said, we still have to document it, because even though it may not do what we want it to do, we're documenting history so later people could go back, hey, they filed this, they filed that, and we have to keep pushing. But absolutely, there's just, it's just, you've worked in there, so you've seen it. No healthcare, retaliation. What kind of retaliations have you saw? I'm sure you've seen some.
Oh gosh, I even experienced retaliation. So when I was in there, I was obviously trying to show them the prison to pipeline videos and like explaining, because half of these men are really young, like 19 years old, 20 years old.
Yes.
I don't have the statistics in front of me. And by the way, I'm in the process of moving, and so I didn't have access, but I have tons of paperwork to share, and I actually have a whole book of stories. And the men chose a topic, but I needed to I have consent from them, but I believe I needed to get consent from other places in order to publish it. We had initially wanted to publish their work in debug, but unfortunately, because I'm moving, I couldn't get access to it. But while I was in there, I tried to show When They See Us from Ava DuVernay, so they could understand what happened to the Central Park Five, which now has a new name. And my bad, I'm sorry, I can't remember what the Central Park Five goes by right now. Do you guys remember?
Central Park 5.
Central Park Five. So they were falsely incarcerated for crimes, these black men. One of them was Boricua, and they were falsely incarcerated. Trump was even in support of it, right? He like wrote this whole thing on the front paper.
Isn't there a book called like the Blue about the Central Park 5? I think they wrote another book too.
Yeah.
Blue lives don't exist.
But this 4-part series I could show, I got cut off by the second one. And then I just was constantly getting in trouble because I was quote unquote pro what they thought pro. So it got to the point, I remember like missing something like an eraser or something, and one of the CEOs when I was walking, I was like, did you leave something? They were listening to every single little word. Like anytime I blew my nose when I turned the other way, I mean, they were hyper watching me to the point where I had an all call about me. And one of my coworkers was like, hey, do you know that there's an all call about you? And I was like, oh my gosh. So every single person knew who I was. I was under the radar. And so what the all call was about was because they couldn't, right? They had to have something to try to like mess with me, right? And so at the jail I was at, we worked in this one area where it was pitch black at night. And you really did need a phone to see in the dark, and you needed a phone to walk. And it was like we weren't supposed to say it out loud, but my boss brought her phone. All my coworkers brought their phone. It was just like, oh, just turn it off when you're walking through the como dice,
The corridor?
the corridor, but you're good. So they started searching me. Like, they didn't search my boss, and I was like, wait a minute, but all my coworkers bring their phones in, like, what? And so that was, like, the quote-unquote thing they try to get me in trouble with. And I eventually, inevitably, got fired, right? And my boss, who wasn't working at the jail, was an organization that was contracted to work at the JOS. Her boss, the woman at the top of the food chain, straight up threatened me. She said, if you keep blabbing your mouth, I'm going to tell the sheriff's office to reopen your file. And I was like,
wow.
I had done teacher activism since I can remember. Every job I've been at, almost, just kidding. I've been an advocate for my students and the parents, doing the good work, following the work of Bettina Love, following the work of Jeffrey Jacaranda, following the work of Rita Kaur, following the work of these role models. I was part of Maestros for a little bit. I've been part of different, still love them and they're still my people, but I was always trained, Free People, they're based out of New York. And so that we've always been trained, like, you do this work. Like, sometimes it comes with a cost, but never in my life has it come with the cost of, like, somebody threatening me like that, or that I had a file. And I was like, what do you mean file? I have a file? What do you mean? What are you talking about? So yeah, they mess with me.
That's like
And
workplace violence.
Yeah, and I
That's
had
supposed to be, that's illegal under labor law.
It's illegal for sure. But so even the organization that was supposedly education, not incarceration, that's making hella money off even being able to go into the prison system. Yeah, I got threatened by the top of the food chain, a woman. And I was so scared. I had to consult with several lawyers who luckily met with me for free. I've been really blessed to have friends like y'all. And I didn't, I was scared. I didn't even feel safe talking about any of this until the statute of limitations passed, because I don't know. I don't know if she was lying. I don't know if she was serious. I don't even know what's in that quote unquote file, or even if it exists. But that's how heavy it was doing any type of advocacy in that place. And then one of my lawyer friends was like, are you crazy? Like, didn't you realize they could plant evidence on you? They could do whatever they want.
Whatever.
They are the most vile, heavyweight, powerful gang on the planet. The Blue Line Gang is the supreme gang. And they're all together. There's so many different people. So the COs who have good intentions, or like the people I worked with or my boss that had good intentions, may have, but they know if they speak up, they will end up like me, or they will end up a target, or they will end up with their house getting blown up, or their car getting jacked, or who knows what, right? Or end up with a file and people threatening them. And so it just scared the daylights out of me, and it made me really have to wake up and see, like, on a grand scale, how well they operate and how they're able to operate, because they have people here and there and there and here, and they're all backing each other up. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's gonna stick their neck out and be like, oh yeah, level 5, they're locking down, and they don't care if the women are suicidal. They're just like, some of these COs, I don't want to say all, because there's some good ones, they go into these jail systems because they're sick. They love and they get off
Like
on torturing people. I saw this one guy, he pulled out all these chains while the men were in this, like, where they come from the bus and they're about to be, I don't know, quarantine, I don't even know what it was, but he just pulled out all these chains and he was sharing it with us. This was before they realized I was a bad before they realized
you're a pro inmate, before they realized you're a pro inmate.
But I have nightmares about that kind of stuff. I mean, that's how things like Michael Tyree happen. Because folks with severe sickness and anger issues, they seek out these jobs to be able to violate already fractured, traumatized humans. It was the most scary thing I've ever witnessed.
And a lot of the police are like that out here on the street too. That's why they get into this line of work.
Like they did some research, and they're saying a lot of the military, like ex-military, that's coming back home, that's been overseas, killing kids, doing what the U.S. military does, right? Just all types of abuse. So they're coming back and they're getting hired to be the COs, to be the pigs on the street, and then they wonder why cases of brutality and police-involved murders are so high. Like, globally, we're only the 5% of the entire world population, and we have a quarter of the inmates, and we're like the heaviest militarized nation ever, and we're a little tadpole in the ocean, but we're really not. That's why, like, when I travel like globally, I tell people, don't come here. You don't want to come here, because that American dream is a facade. It does not exist.
And we've seen that, what you talk about with Abu Ghraib, when the military were in they came from the military and then went to the prison. They're the ones that were torturing in Iraqi prison, and then they went to work in the federal prison in, I think, Pennsylvania, where Mumia Abu Jamal was, and they were guards there. These are the same ones that were remember, they were all over the news like this, and they had a stack of Iraqi bodies. Then these are the ones that were torturing the people there. They come over here and they do the same thing, and yeah, it's sickening. But let me ask you, so I had another question about when you were working in there, and you're right. I agree that you know, for the guards that don't partake in this abuse, they're not speaking against it, you know. So the ones that really in their hearts can't tolerate, they just leave. But if they're there and they're watching it and you're not speaking up against it, you're just as guilty in my book, you know. But let me ask you this: while you were there and witnessing all this stuff, um, have you ever ran into any of your coworkers out here somewhere, maybe educators, medical, or even guards? You know, they live in our community sometimes. You know, you could run into them at the wherever. Have you ever ran into these people and interacted with them out here? That's my question. Have you, even your coworkers, friends? I'm sure you had friends that were nurses or nobody.
No, I haven't.
Oh.
I mean, I've definitely ran into some of the folks that worked at Debug, but they weren't in the jail system.
Yeah. And how about the prisoners?
No.
I mean, these are our friends and family.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure you grew up with. I mean, you know.
I think too, because I left, right? I like kind of went to Hollister.
Oh yeah.
And then
Okay.
I've only sort of recently come back to the Bay Area because I lost. We were displaced, our landlord. No, I didn't. I did want to say one thing though about the grievance, just to circle back
Absolutely.
a few questions ago. The one way that if there is some abuse going on, one of my students said that she went to internal affairs. Now
Mhm.
that's like kind of last resort in that situation, but she said it worked, and she said nobody effed with her. She was listened to. The guards like gave her a lot of respect. So I don't know if they're not allowing folks who are incarcerated to file grievances, if they're not listening, if they're not abiding by the appeal system. Hey, they have to file an internal affairs report and call internal affairs. They got to do what they got to do.
And a citizen's complaint, and a tort claim. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of times, because what happens is a lot of times in there, and I've filed hundreds of grievances, they throw them away.
Yeah.
So you never even get a log number, because when you follow up, where's my log number? They say, we never even got a grievance. They throw it because who do we give our mail to? The guards. The very people that we are filing a grievance on. So they
Yeah.
get them, and what do? They inspect the mail at night, toss it in the garbage, you know. So a lot of times we have to go around them, go straight to Sacramento, file a tort claim, file a citizen's complaint, and that stays in their file for 5 years, you know. So these are the things that hurt them. They don't want any blemishes on their record. They're trying to get promoted. But the grievance, I mean, unless it's a group appeal, but then what happens, I'm sure, when you were there, did you ever see prisoners filing a group appeal in there? Hell no, right?
No.
Yeah.
And I was beginning to talk about what they did with the hunger strikes, right, in Pelican Bay.
Okay.
And then that was considered illegal.
Yeah.
Like for me to share the documents with them.
Really?
I can't remember what it's called. Contraband. It was
Okay.
considered contraband.
Probably
They're
threatens
so
the safety and
scared.
security of the institution,
They're
right?
so scared of like folks binding together, knowing
Oh,
their
yeah.
rights, knowing how to demand, just basic human treatment. And going back to
Wow.
Michael Tyree, the reason why they were successful in having accountability for those cops is because Michael Tyree had a sister who had money, who could get a lawyer, who could file the justice that needed to be done, and then this man was white.
Mm.
So think about if he was brown. Think about if he was a person of color that had no money, didn't have a sister advocating. And I'm not saying that he didn't deserve justice, because by all means, he was only there for 3 days. And he was screaming like, please stop. You can look it up, you can Google it. Please stop, please stop. I mean, everybody heard it. So everybody knew what had happened to him. I mean, he was
Wow.
horrifically murdered.
Beaten
And
to death.
beaten to death, and only there for 3 days.
Wow.
But imagine if it was, a person of color, and how many times has that happened to poor people of color who have yet to receive justice? How many suicides have been in there? What is the rate of suicide? And I just
go back to the only way we're going to have accountability in these cookie factories and these concentration camps is if folks are allowed to visit, if all these videos that are in there are sent directly to the public, or the public can like see what's going on. But better yet, divest, because they're just torturing people left and right. And it's like, and how much money did they spend on the lawsuit? I think the family got like 3.5 million or something.
Which is, it's nothing, right? Because your loved one's gone. So I'm sure they would trade that in a heartbeat just to have him back, even for a minute. So it's absolutely disgusting. And then whose money? Where does the lawsuit come from? I mean, the payout, because it's police brutality, correct? Is it COs? Is the same? So we pay for that. That's our money. Like all of those payouts, people want. They celebrate like the slim chance when pigs are held accountable, right? But that's your money. That doesn't come out of their pensions. That doesn't come from it doesn't impact them financially in any way. That impacts us, right, as a society. Why are we carrying the burden of someone's malice, for their abuse of their position, of their perceived authority, right? It's just I had a quick question for you, though. You brought up suicide. I'm kind of curious, in your professional opinion, as far as do you think the rates are higher in juvenile halls compared to like jails versus prisons? And then my second question would be, who has the highest rate? So is it males, whether it's boys or men? Is it female gender, or is it non-binary? I was just kind of curious what because I know this woman is so smart. So I know you've done so much work. You've not only worked in there, I know you have a lot of knowledge, and just from knowing people in the streets that have been funneled, through the prison industrial complex. I was just curious what your professional opinion was on the suicide rates, just in the different types of facilities, and then who's impacted more or less, or even if that does exist or not, so.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the data on the juvenile halls. I'm sorry, but I know for a fact in the adult prison, it is the young men. And they're more likely to commit suicide in the first few days. But within I think it's like 14 to 21% of like that being the cause of their death, which is high. It's generally with the younger population, so like from 18 to 30.
And is that in like state penitentiaries, federal penitentiaries, or like county jails? It's all over? Okay.
Yeah.
And I did some research too on that, and I found that the highest rates of suicide were in solitary confinement. And there are more men in solitary confinement than women, only because there's more male prisoners than. And then also when you look at juveniles versus adults, juveniles typically spend a few days in solitary, whereas adult men spend 30, 40, all the way up to Hugo Pinal was there for like 40 something years. So, that's why it's usually the men, usually solitary confinement. I believe in California, the numbers are that the SHU prisoners have the highest suicide rates because they're in solitary confinement, for years. So, and the women, it's just that there's less women prisoners. So that's the only reason that there are less women committing suicide. But solitary is solitary.
Yeah, so you think SHU is definitely a factor then, right?
Absolutely.
So I know you mentioned about juvenile hall, but I do want to make a point. So the ICE facility that I did tour, it was at a juvenile hall. So they were funneling kids from ICE, right, from immigration, and they had 23-hour lockdown.
Was it
and these are kids. These are children.
Or was it a permanent facility, or was it like they're in transit? What kind of? Facility?
Everybody had different stay protocols or time, I guess you want to say, that they were there, but it was an active facility, so it wasn't like as far as what I understood it to be, it wasn't something where, oh, they kept them for like 5-10 years, but they're
Right.
definitely, I believe it could be there even up to months, if not 12 months, 24 months. I think it's based on the federal contract. From when I was asking the director a bunch of questions, she just kept referring it back to, oh, well, it's just whatever the federal government gives us. It's this and that, yada, yada, yada. But I had even told them, like, y'all have these kids in here 23 hours a day? Because, I was an incarcerated youth. Like, how are you gonna say, like, oh, well, we're doing this and that and yada yada yada, and you're getting $5.7 million for 19 kids for 12 months, right? Because this is an annual budget, but yet you have them on a 23-hour lockdown. So what are you using that money for? For what? To fatten your pockets? Because it's not going to the kids.
Yeah, and then the trauma probably affects kids way worse than adults. Adults have formed their brains. Children are still growing. So that's definitely having an effect on their development, mental development. So we don't even know. There's never been studies. We don't know how it affects children. Almost definitely it affects them more than it affects adults. And we know it devastates adults. People are killing themselves. So it's horrible what they're doing to the children. No matter how many there is, it's horrible. But
Yeah.
Yeah, and even these men, the adult male brain isn't fully developed until 25.
25,
So it's bananas to me that
Some might be a little
Some,
later.
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
take longer. And the stats that I gave for the suicide rates, that was based on men. I actually don't have them for
For the
for the
women.
women. And that's for me to notate because I definitely should.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the children. We should have stats on how many children are committing suicide. You know what's happening.
And then you can, and even with that, with the kids, right? Because you have the juvenile halls, and then you have the ICE facilities that are just everywhere now at this point. And it's like, I think the Biden administration lost, 80,000 this year? I mean, the numbers have jumped ridiculously since it's just, I cannot believe that we even have to discuss this stuff. But so it's like when we're getting like these stats together and researching this, we can't forget about our indigenous relatives, right? Even the mothers, fathers, grandparents, the tias, the tios, everybody, all the indigenous relatives coming over that are incarcerated as well. Just because they're not quote unquote U.S. citizens, that does not matter. They still are human beings. They're on their natural homelands. These are their homelands, right? So treaties protect them, although the U.S. does not adhere to them. That is the law of the land. So when we're getting all this data together, I encourage not only us but our listeners, look and see what else you can find, because you won't see that at the surface. You like if you're researching kids, right, or if you're researching incarcerated adults, the stats on folks in immigration, they're not going to be there. So it's kind of like you have to dig more if you want to have an accurate figure, because there's literally like thousands that we don't know. And then for the folks that we do know about, like you shared with us, it's just like, what? Just hearing these stories, it's very disheartening to know that we live in a system that still operates as it did since its inception on this soil. So
Yeah. And it's what do you see the future of education? Like you said, you've been on the front lines, fighting with other educators, trying to make this transition stuff, available everywhere, not just in the affluent communities. But what do you think? What would you like to see done in the education system?
Oh, so many things. So most of my battles have never been with other educators. They've usually been with administrators or the CEOs. Like my first teaching job was at a DCP school, and they were situated in El Viso, and we were next to 4 Superfund sites, which are AKA toxic waste dumps. And so I don't have the name of the proposition, but they were supposed to inform us that they're carcinogens, and there's kids parents were being bussed in, and I was like, I know I'm not trying to get cancer. And so I went into full-blown advocacy mode, and the students and the teacher and the students and the parents all worked together. None of the teachers fought by my side. In fact, nobody did. I was scared of the EPA, and it's like nobody did anything. You know what I'm saying? Eventually the school lost enrollment and the school was shut down thanks to our advocacy. And I was a first year teacher at that time. This was tons of years ago. But the way that administrators dealt with it, and I wish I had known more then. I mean, this was a very long time ago. I would have organized the parents to file a class action lawsuit because it was a violation of
Which
that
people
proposition.
do now, right? People do that.
Yeah,
now.
it was a violation of that proposition, and then we should have advocated to build another school, outside of the toxic waste. But I got really scared with the EPA, coming to the school. I just got scared. I didn't want to be Aaron Brockovich. Howard to Aaron Brockovich.
Yeah.
And the EPA, for listeners that don't know, what's the EPA?
The Environmental Protection Agency. So what needed to happen in that instance is for the teachers to fight with me, for them to not be this oh, I don't want to lose my job. It's
Don't you want a safe work
what
environment?
what the heck? You want to let your kids get cancer? You want to get cancer?
Mhm.
And so that's why I've always followed the work of Jeffrey Duncan Andrade. He's you go to bat for your kids, you go to bat for your community, and it all works out. Are you a wanksta teacher, a gangsta teacher, or are you a writer?
Hey.
And his work touched me at an early age, and how they, this was at an early age in my when I was in grad school for my initial teaching credentials was 13. I don't remember 15. I don't remember. But anyway, so I think more teachers need to step it up. More teachers need to follow the work of Bettina Love. More teachers they're so scared. Everybody's so scared, oh, I don't want
There's
to lose
people
my
scared everywhere, but yeah, you're right.
I don't want to lose my
absolutely.
job. And I was well, why did you come into the education field?
Yeah.
And especially as a special ed teacher, you're an advocate.
Yeah.
People really need to push the envelope. Make sure that the districts are abiding by IDEA. Make sure that the districts are abiding by ADA. Make sure that the districts are abiding by what they say they're going to do. Because that's just one of many schools. I worked for Alisal, migrant education, and I was had to call out the misuse of migrant funds. And that was, I don't remember how long ago that was, but again, it was the parents and the president of the migrant education. And these were kids who already have enough on their plate. They're moving around. They suffer. A lot of them didn't want to speak out because they aren't documented.
Right.
They have, parents who could get deported. I get why but it was them.
Yeah.
It was them who was helping me, call this out or call this in, but none of the teachers. And then the administrators didn't do the right thing. So it's just really sad. You have all these districts and they know the effery going on, right? They know what's going on. And so sometimes they do the right thing, but in the ones where I've had to leave or maybe I did get hired back, it's where was the integrity? Why did you even sign up for this job? I had one job, it was in local San Jose, and not San Jose, it was in San Jose, the school I worked at, and they had this ROTC come on
Oh my.
to recruit, and I was working with alternative 8th graders and 7th graders, kids who had been kicked out of school, and they were trying to recruit my kids. So I stood up, I was excuse me, this is not a social justice program. They were oh, this is a part of the social justice program from either Independent High School or Andrew Hill, and I just went to town. And I really let them know. And so why did that principal allow that? Why did the district allow that? Where are the people in charge? They're the ones that need to make it viable for us to really walk this talk. There's a huge discrepancy in what teachers are learning in their education programs, in their pre-teaching, there's a specific word for that. And then when you actually get into the field and how your tongue is tied, your tongue is cut off and your hands are tied behind your back. And so we're taught to be these advocates and to fight white supremacist teaching, to be agents of social change. And you have all these amazing radical folks like Bettina Love teaching us how to do it. But then when we actually do it, we become targets. And so that needs to change. They need to really do away with, with the lack of integrity. And why would DCP have a school situated on 4 toxic waste dumps? And the thing is, they knew, because I had a friend that worked, she was part of my SROS group. I had a friend that worked in that charter, and she knew and kind of let me know. And so they knew, because somebody that they had hired didn't want to work there after doing her research, because you can find out publicly whether, I think, they're situated next to toxic waste dumps. So they knew but didn't tell us. So there's a huge lack of integrity, and they have this huge presence and like, oh, champions of social change. And it's like, just like the school I worked with when I was at the jails, these like champions of like education on incarceration, except for when it comes to you, if you don't shut your mouth, we're going to call the sheriff's office and ask them to reopen your file.
Wow.
Like, what kind of hypocrisy is that?
And it sounded like the teachers get the same treatment as the prisoners.
Yeah,
You
so it
speak
needs
up,
to
you
come
get retaliated,
from the
right?
top. They need to really walk their talk, go to ceremony, whatever they need to do to bring back that integrity, because that's where it happens, is at the top.
There it is there.
School
And
board.
we-
Join the school boards.
Right, yes, absolutely, we agree with that, but we are running out of time here, so I wanted to throw out there for the listeners, if you have like any kind of contact info, or if you want to kind of, throw a contact information on another organization or group that maybe people can learn from, some of the stuff you're talking about, as far as the educational system, the transition programs that you were talking about. What are some good resources that if people want to learn, there might be a young teacher out there listening to you saying, you know what, I like what she's saying, how do I learn more? What would you direct her?
Oh gosh.
Or him.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was saying, or him.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question, and I wish I had the like immediate answers.
Well,
What I
what
can
was
do
the-
is research,
Mhm.
because I know I have it like in my files, like
Right.
different organizations.
Absolutely. Well, what's the guy's name that you named that you looked up to and
Oh,
aspired?
here locally in Oakland, Jeffrey Duncan Andrade.
There he is.
I highly
Research that.
recommend watching any YouTube video from Bettina Love. I
you go.
highly recommend looking at the work of Bree Pacauer, who wants to eradicate racism and white supremacist teachings in our teacher ed
Yes.
programs, where it needs to start. And
Yes.
just start even with them three. But as far as like justice for folks with disabilities, I feel like there needs to be even more, you know. But yeah, I will put it once the video gets streamed. I will put different links
Oh, perfect.
in the comments once I get a chance to go to my computer.
And that is wonderful. We look forward to that. And any last words, Tina? Or
No, I mean, thank you for being here. I know we kind of were fumbling in the beginning, but it's always a good time seeing you,
Absolutely.
girl. So
Absolutely.
I'm so happy that you're here. And for the listeners listening, the homegirl, she's going to be doing grad school, wrapping it up. So she's going to be leaving me just for a little bit, but you know, coming back to be a bigger shark so we can get those changes made, right? So, because it's about education, not incarceration
That's
or
what's up.
assimilation. So
That's what's
people
up.
need to get their mind right. Yeah, we're in 2022, people. Get with it.
That's what's up.
Yeah,
There it
basta
is,
con el prison and pipeline and prison, basta.
Basta. And with that note, we will see you next week. Thank you all for joining us, and oh Mateo.
Oh,
Yay!
Ashe.
Thank you both. Thank you,
I
man.
kind of talk too much.
No,
You guys are asking. I'm like, I'm passionate about all these things.
You did that.
Sorry.
That was good.
That's a good show.
Lifesaver. Look at it. Lifesaver. Oh.
I'll try